Call this meeting to order. Committee of the Whole agenda for Monday, October the 18th at 1 o'clock. And we will do a quick roll call. Councillor Foster.
Present.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
I'm present.
Councillor McElwain.
Present.
Councillor Kittredge.
Present.
Councillor Dunsmore.
Here.
Councillor McCrae.
Here.
Okay, so the first, no addendums or corrections to the agenda. I ask first if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. There is a community delegation. If any motion comes forward from that community delegation, I will have to leave the meeting because I live right beside that bridge. But for the sake of just listening to the delegation, I'm allowed to do that.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Kittredge. Anybody else? Okay, first thing, we have approval and adoption of minutes. We have several sets of minutes there. I have a recommendation that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meetings held June 14th, 2021 and September 20th, 2021, and the public meetings under the Planning Act, Committee of the Whole held June 30th, 2021 and September 29th, 2021 be adopted as circulated. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. Wow, we're fast on the seconding there. All in favor? Thank you very much. That's passed. Moving on to presentations and announcements. We have with us today community delegation, Stephanie Toohill, the Save Middlebrook Bridge Community Action Group, and I have a lot of people on my screen here. So is Stephanie, are you here? I don't see Stephanie on this call right now. We're just checking to see if she's in the waiting room. Oh, there's Stephanie, and her owner. We'll call you Stephanie rather than owner, if that's okay. So I just introduced you, Stephanie. Feel free to take yourself off mute, and there you go. We can hear you now and provide your delegation. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. Oh, thank you. Whoever put my name in. That's great. I'm not the best Zoomer in the world, so that's helpful. And Mark is there, I see also.
I arrived, thanks. Yep.
So would you like me to speak now?
Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie. You have 10 minutes, so go ahead and give your delegation. That's great. If just a reminder for folks that aren't speaking.
Okay, so I will speak first and then Mark Walker is speaking after me, and we are each keeping our time to 5 minutes each. So Mayor Linton and Council, thank you so much for hearing us today. I am Stephanie Lyons Toohill, and I represent the Save Middlebrook Bridge Community Action Group, and we're very honored to be here with you today. Our 177 members and growing, plus over 3,000 members of various cycling, hiking, recreationist groups across the region are urging you to reconsider your decision to remove Middlebrook Bridge and instead rehabilitate it as a safe and scenic historical crossing point for pedestrian and recreational use over this beautiful bend in the Grand River. Public outcry against the closure of the bridge began in April when huge barricades were placed without effective notice for meaningfully public input to council. When council based its decision with guidance from the environmental assessment conducted by Blue Plan in 2018, a vital piece of information was missing. The EA failed to include active transportation in the study. If it had been included, it would have demonstrated significant use of the bridge by many local and non-local individuals and groups for safe access through the region's rural corridor away from busy roads. And this is in alignment with the Centre Wellington Transportation and Trails Master Plan. The letters provided to you, which are only a sample from the multitude of diverse community members who regularly use the bridge, show that this missing information is vital for council to make an informed decision about the value and the use of the bridge. The chairs of the Guelph Trail Users Coalition, comprising of 9 cycling, hiking, and running clubs with over 2,000 members, and the G2G Guelph Trailway, write to say that its members cross the bridge on at least a weekly basis. Alan Frank, the past president of Waterloo Cycling Club, with over 500 members, says they rely entirely on the many bridges in the region to form a connected network of safe, calm routes, and they use Middlebrook Bridge as a central travelway throughout all seasons. Mark Walker, who is speaking after me, will expand on the great importance of the bridge to cyclists and will highlight the changes the pandemic brought to the world of cycling and need for greater interconnectivity of trails. If economics are the swaying factor in the decision to remove the bridge, what are the economic benefits of retaining it? Well, studies over the past 2 decades have shown that the return on investment for cycling infrastructure is very high, particularly from tourism spending. A significant portion of these cyclists are retirees with fixed pensions, making this form of transportation recession-proof. Given that all forms of active transportation and spending time in nature are necessary activities to support health and well-being, the rehabilitation of Middlebrook Bridge is an important candidate to receive significant funding from the National Active Transportation Strategy Fund, which was announced by the government in July of this year. The EA also failed to investigate the long-term economic tourism benefits of retaining the bridge due to its eligibility for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act, and no effort was placed on finding possible alternative funding which could support its long-term preservation, as recommended by the Cultural Heritage Evaluation Impact Statement. In conclusion, since 1840, this bridging point has carried people over the Grand River. Middlebrook Place Bridge connects people to the history of the region with its unique craftsmanship and design. It is renowned as a vital access point for many cyclists and all forms of active transportation through the rural corridor of our region. The bend in the river here is known for its serenity in nature and is a place of gathering, trail walking, fishing, and quiet contemplation on the bridge with stunning views throughout all seasons. We urge council to please reconsider its decision and show good governance by recognizing the community value of the bridge and to support its rehabilitation as an important and safe active transportation route with access to trailways as outlined in the Centre Wellington Transportation and Trails Master Plan. I thank you for your attention and meaningful engagement in this very important issue. I now pass over to Mark Walker.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. And Mark, go ahead. You have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. Mayor Linton, Centre Wellington Council. As Stephanie mentioned, my name's Well, I am Mark Walker, and I'm in the same group, same citizens group, you could say, that's really fighting for the restoration of Middlebrook Bridge. Thank you for allowing the time for Stephanie and I to share our concerns. And these concerns are representative of a large growing group. It's actually, the numbers are just under 200 now, and every day people are joining. So the issue is out there. There's awareness in recreational groups for sure, and certainly around Elora, Ferguson, Wellington. It's a beautiful setting, a fantastic location, no question about that. And now it's been shuttered and slated for demolition, which has really caught the attention of the people that we're representing here. I'd like to emphasize and elaborate on some of these recreational aspects, if you will. This bridge has been appreciated for years, by many people who visit this location, simply to enjoy, as Stephanie said, the amazing serenity of this location. It's a gentle river bend, and the structure itself is really quite unusual. You just don't see these sorts of truss bridges anymore. Many of the hikers, dog walkers, photographers, cyclists, even horseback riders that used to use this bridge on a daily basis would pause and take in, the surroundings for quiet contemplation, as well as using it for practical crossing of the river. So it's certainly a badly needed part of the infrastructure, and just a beautiful spot for this healthy contemplation. I've personally actually fished for brown trout at this bend in the river and used it to cross, as many other fishermen do. And this same stretch from many of you probably know this, but the same stretch of the Grand River has been declared, one of the best brown trout fisheries in North America, between Bellwood Dam and West Montrose. So this is certainly a part and parcel of that attraction. And I've seen fishermen there coming up from the U.S., from the northern states, just to fish this location. So it's very, very popular from, I would say, all over the continent probably. But my main passion really is for cycling. And as Stephanie mentioned, we've heard the concerns voiced by several clubs and many individuals representing, thousands of cyclists that used to use this bridge on a regular basis. The bridge is situated to allow for the perfect crossing point of the Grand to link many official trails that we recognize, such as the Elora Cataract, the Cottontail, Goddard's to Guelph, and Guelph to Elora. And I personally crossed this bridge on average probably twice per week in the past, to link together many of these, lightly traveled gravel roads, farm lanes, road allowances, and the trails that I just mentioned around Ferguson and Elora. And you can never resist the urge to stop and take in a view up and down. I haven't gone to the extreme mentioned in the letter. There are, I think, letters attached to this for this delegation, but the Waterloo Cycling Club has pointed out that it's gone to the extreme that they have members carrying their bikes over their heads to cross the river at this location, which I think speaks to how critical this point of crossing is for the Grand River. I want to point out that one of the fastest growing segments of the cycling world for several years now, and probably somewhat aided by, or at least I would say enhanced or accelerated, I should say, by the pandemic, has been the growth of gravel or adventure cycling. And this development in the world of recreational cycling has come about as the cycling public really recognized the need to avoid busy roads with fast, large vehicles, too often with distracted or simply inconsiderate drivers. And I can personally attest to this desire to get off those roads after I was taken out in a road accident with a broken elbow and hand. And luckily nothing worse, but I turned to gravel and sort of the lightly traveled areas to enjoy my sport continuously. So you take any day, especially a weekend, and like me, you'll see large numbers of gravel riders stopping in my hometown of Elora. And they're usually stopping at a coffee shop for, a coffee and a butter tart, and enjoying, this beautiful area that we have. This incredible growth in gravel riding too is actually proven by the fact that at least 80% of new sales and servicing at for me, my local contact bike shop, which is the Bicycle Tailor, have confirmed that, over 80% of their sales and service is now for these, gravel bikes, if you will. But in order to promote this specific aspect of cycling, we need we need to enhance the infrastructure needed mainly for, bridges, trails, and bike lanes and the connectivity of those. It's worth noting, I think, also that Center Wellington's own Trails Master Plan from May 2014, which is closely aligned to Wellington County's Active Transportation Master Plan, has a large focus on connectivity of these trails. So not just the trails' importance, but the connectivity between them for both recreational and, as Stephanie pointed out, the active transportation aspect. And of course, part of that connectivity is bridges. There are so many reasons to retain, this beautiful and useful structure that we're talking about, but I'd like to point out the minimal capital implications for both Woolwich and Center Wellington. In the 2018 EA, that was Middlebrook Bridge, sponsored by Woolwich Township and completed by Blue Plan Engineering, there are 6 financial projections put forward. The 2 that are of most interest, I think, is the estimated cost of alternative number 3, which is removal, sits at $700,000, while the estimated cost of alternative 4 to rehabilitate for pedestrian use, which would be cycling, hiking, mainly, is $900,000. So we're only talking about a difference in those 2 scenarios of $200,000 shared between 2 townships. So we're asking Center Wellington Township Council to seriously consider what Stephanie and I, and we're representing many, have expressed here today, and to work with Woolwich Township to find a way to preserve this beautiful bridge, for our community, locally and from afar, for years to come. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks very much, Stephanie, for your delegations and coming to join us today. I'm going to give councillors the opportunity to ask questions and provide their thoughts, but before that, I'm going to give our Colin Baker, our Managing Director of Infrastructure, the opportunity to give us a little bit of context. As you've mentioned, Stephanie, Mark, this is a jointly owned bridge, so I'd like him to provide council with a little bit of context as to kind of the roles, responsibilities when it comes to a jointly owned bridge. It's different depending on depending on what bridge is shared between 2 municipalities, and I just want council to have a really good sense and the public to have a really good sense of kind of the status of this bridge and what has been decided by council on this bridge, so we have all the information prior to our questions. So over to you, Colin, if you can help us out there.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. So just to provide some context, so this bridge is located on Middlebrook Place, which is a boundary road between the Township of Center Wellington and the Township of Woolwich. And so we have what's called a boundary road agreement that was approved by both councils just before this EA process commenced. That kind of governs how maintenance activities as well as capital improvements will be conducted on the boundary road. And so, so that's just some context there. We did participate in the EA process, the environmental assessment process, which did wrap up in 2020. And there was a report that went to our township council. I believe the date was, just looking at it here, January 27th, 2020, endorsing the preferred alternative through the environmental assessment process. And as we do with our environmental assessments, we look for that council endorsement prior to publishing what we call the notice of completion. So that's the public notification of basically the preferred solution for the environmental assessment. So that was done in that notice of completion period, wrapped up in February 19th, 2020. And yeah, so that's a summary of how we got to that preferred alternative. Went to a full EA. There was public meetings that, as I recall, were fairly well attended. And the Township of Woolwich actually led the environmental assessment process. They're responsible for the maintenance and ongoing inspection of the structure, and they took the lead on the environmental assessment as well. And like I said, we were at the table as well, but mostly as a funding partner through the environmental assessment. I just note as well, any sort of, not only were we a funding partner for the environmental assessment, but any sort of capital costs, we would share the costs of those 50-50. So on a 50-50 basis with Woolwich. So any capital improvements, repairs, replacements would be a shared cost.
Okay, thanks very much, Colin. And just to clarify for council, so council has made a decision on this bridge. So any change in that position would again have to go through a motion for reconsideration. We know all about that now, and it would require a 2/3 majority vote in order for us to reconsider this. So just making sure the council is aware of the context here. Okay, so I'll turn it over to council for questions and comments, and I'll start with, we'll go around the room. I'll start with Councillor McCrae.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I guess, where do I start? Back in November of 2020, the GRCA board received a staff report on the Westmont Rose Dam. And at that time, we were advised that Region of Waterloo staff asked the GRCA to keep the dam on its books as a potential future construction. The reason being due to uncertainties with climate change and continued population growth, that they might need the dam to manage water and also to provide a future source of water to supplement groundwater reserves. That said, I'm wondering, is there a possibility until such time as the bridge is removed, could we still allow pedestrian cyclist access on the bridge? I think the key thing is ensuring that we don't have horse and vehicles riding over the bridge. Another thing I just want to throw out there for future consideration, if after the bridge was removed, if the piers and abutments were to remain, could we consider at some future date some sort of an alternative like a fiberglass reinforced composite material bridge? These things are relatively easy to construct and put over long rivers. They're used quite frequently within the US at federal, state, and local parks. And they're used for things such as pedestrian cycling and horse uses. So hearing what the delegation is presenting to us, maybe it's something that at some future point council could consider, is if we want to continue to have some form of crossing for that area.
Colin, could you comment on that initial point that Councillor McCrae made? Because I think that's pretty important to this discussion. The thought that this would still be safe for pedestrian and cyclist use. Can you just comment on that, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. So my understanding is the bridge as it stands is not safe for use, and just even for pedestrian cyclist use it would require some significant capital investment in repairs to make it safe once again. And so and again, like that option was evaluated through the EA process. Life cycle costing was completed for, I believe they looked at 7 or 8 different options. And it's not just a case of reopening. There's some significant repairs to the existing structure that would be required, is my understanding.
Councillor McCrae?
No, that's all I have.
Sorry, I meant Councillor Dunsmore. I was looking at you, but I meant Councillor Dunsmore. Go ahead, Councillor Dunsmore.
It's okay. We look alike. We're often mistaken for each other. Colin, we voted to take this bridge out, right? And not replace it. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Linton, yeah, that's correct. So council endorsed the preferred alternative as brought forward through the EA process, which was removal without replacement.
Okay, so then we don't have to worry about response times from the fire department or the ambulance services because it's divided, right? So the other side of the river would be Woolwich's responsibility anyway. So we're only obligated to go to our side of the bridge. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Linton, so the emergency response would either be through Middlebrook Road, likely from the north side, or from the south through Weisenberg road from the south off of County Road 21. Yeah, there is another culvert that was looked at the same time on the north side that is actually ended close to the end of its service life as well. And another part of the recommendation for the EA was to replace the culvert on the north side. So it does provide access to a home, a residence that is kind of separated by a little tributary of the Grand there. And so that was part of the preferred option as well. So there'd still be emergency access to that residence from the north side from Middlebrook Road.
So did the 900,000 that we saw in that report, did that include that culvert as well?
I don't believe so. That would have been treated separately. That would have been a separate cost estimate provided.
Okay, and has anybody, I mean, we consulted the GRCA on this project when we had the original vote, right? So we've had their say in this?
Through Mayor Linton, yeah, so agencies that would normally be circulated through an EA process like GRCA, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Natural Resources were all circulated through the environmental assessment.
Okay, and I have one last question, Your Worship, if that's okay, and it would go to procedure. If we were to revisit this, because it's a joint decision made by two different councils, we would have to meet with them, would we? Or would we have to consult with Woolwich before we did anything to change anything on this decision?
It had to go through both councils to decide on this. So I imagine the same process would have to happen in reverse. It would have to go back to both councils, and both councils would have to follow their own procedures bylaw in order to reconsider their piece of it. But it would have to pass both councils in order for it to get a revised action as a result of it. So I'm not sure what their procedures bylaw is, but I'm imagining it's very similar to ours.
Okay. That's all I have.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Colin. I wanted to know whether if the numbers were accurate that were presented by the delegations, that it would cost $700,000 to remove the bridge and $900,000 to rehabilitate it. Is that accurate?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Kittrus, through Mayor Linton. So I don't have the EA report open in front of me, so I'm not able to confirm those numbers at this moment.
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you, Mayor. To answer Steve's question, I was one of two, my wife and I were one of two couples that actually showed up at the public meeting for that was held on 8th Line for this bridge. It wasn't well attended. There were only 4 of us. Actually, I think there was a 5th person who came in eventually, but there were only 4 of us there. But at that particular time, it was over $650,000 to remove it and $900,000 to retain it, to rehabilitate it. So the numbers are very close. Yeah, there was only a little over $200,000 difference between the two. And for that reason, I mean, for all the reasons that Stephanie and Mark have already highlighted, I think we made a mistake agreeing to close it. For the small difference in cost, to walk away with nothing versus spending another $200,000 for having a connecting link, it would cost us more than that. It has cost us more than that to build trails in the past, and here we are throwing away a trail for, a really well-used trail connection for about $200,000, which is to me wasteful, if nothing else. And as Stephanie and Mark have pointed out, that particular bridge is very popular, not only for a trail crossing, but just as a fishing spot, as a photo opportunity, I mean, I love that bridge personally. I used to cross it all the time when it was still open to traffic. I used it instead of taking 8th line because it's just a much more attractive drive through there to Middlebrook Road. So it's a beautiful spot, and to close it down, force people to have to wade across the river carrying their bikes. To me, it's a very wasteful shutdown of that facility, and $200,000 spread between the two communities. I expect we would have to go back. Stephanie and Mark have already delegated to Woolwich, and they have not responded in any way at this point. But I think if we agreed to revisit the decision, I expect it would have some influence on whether Woolwich would be willing to do the same thing. So I don't know if that's a fact or not. That's staff know that better than I do. But if we don't do anything, then for sure Woolwich won't. So I think we have to. I would like to make a motion that we reconsider this bridge closing.
Okay, so we'll get to that motion after everybody's had a chance to speak. I just want to clarify again, the $200,000 number has not been confirmed by our staff. I would suggest that if council wants to look at that staff do have the authority to go and look into this. Again, just a reminder, when we have a community delegation, our staff haven't been directed to do any background work for this. So I've asked a couple questions of Colin based on his awareness of bridges, but just to clarify, our staff do not come to these meetings when there's a community delegation with all a report in hand. So if we do want to have accurate numbers, there's a job that council has to do to request that from our staff. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks, Mayor. One of my questions would have been very similar to Councillor Kitchiss's, is in regards to how accurate are the numbers. So I am very curious about that, because to spend around the $700,000 to remove, I would be willing to, if it's a rebuild or I think that it's worthwhile to keep that link there for the $200,000 difference. But I think that we should refer it back to staff. My other question was, what does the EA all entail when it speaks about rehabilitating? What does it look like? I think we need more details as to, is it a crossing that can handle four-wheelers, horses, or just a bicycle weight? So I think we need a little more detail as to what that $900,000 would actually entail before we make a decision. So I'm wondering if we can refer it back. That's where I would stand. Thanks.
Yeah, so as far as the process would have, as far as the process goes, Councillor Van Leeuwen, before we did refer it, we'd have to first have a motion to reconsider, and just like we did last time, we'd need to do a notice of a motion to reconsider so that the public are aware that we will be talking about something, so that they come prepared and council comes prepared for that. And then if that motion to reconsider pass, at that point, then we could refer something on to staff. So because we've already made a decision on this item, there is that extra step. So just so that council is aware of that. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I was never comfortable with, and I actually voted against this process when we considered this matter. I'd also wish to point out, I agree with Councillor McElwain. Those numbers were tabled, and if they're not accurate to the penny, they're very, very close. And I think they're a reasonable estimate of the cost of demolition and the cost of repair. So we're in the ballpark at the very least. And I agree completely with Councillor McElwain. I was never comfortable with removing this beautiful bridge, and I would be happily willing to second the motion made by Councillor McElwain that we reconsider this matter. at the very least, we can have a second look and look at things like costing and look at things, a more detailed look at the costs and benefits of removal versus rehabilitation. So I'm fully in support of Councillor McElwain's motion to reconsider, and I second that motion to reconsider it.
Okay, thanks, Counselor, for those thoughts. Any additional thoughts from council? Counselor Kittrus? I did see your hand moving there.
Yes, it looks like there will be a vote, but I do have one more question for the delegation. And I'm wondering if they've considered purchasing or having a partial gift of the bridge to a citizen group to initiate this as a separate item. And therefore it would be not about revisiting, but having more being able to get funding alternatively about this bridge and the crossing. So I'm just wondering if they've looked into that aspect of this bridge. Also, if there's a vote, I have to leave.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Kittrus. I don't think we knew that that option was available to us. That's a brand new concept that personally I have never heard of. Mark?
Yeah, likewise, Stephanie. I mean, I certainly in the back of my mind, I've been thinking about ways to achieve what we're going after here, which would be possibly, fundraising and community support, and even things like Trillium or other foundations that might contribute to something like this, or heritage funding of some sort. But as far as pursuing it or, looking into the details of how that could happen, no, nothing further.
I'm going to leave.
Okay. We'll make sure that you're let back in when we're done this item here. Okay, so again, I know that Councillor McElwain, you actually, I wouldn't mind saying a couple things, and then we'll go to Councillor McElwain for a motion that you want to put on the floor. One of the things I just wanted to mention is that through the bridge rebuild, 2% bridge rebuilding capital levy over the last, since 2015, we've invested significant amounts of money at rebuilding and building our bridges so that we're on track to rebuild 21 bridges in 8 years. And so now we're being asked to, and we've had a 4-3 vote on that item over the last 7 years. And now we're being asked to add more money to that effort by councillors who voted in opposition to this in the past. So I just find that a little bit ironic, and I just wanted to make sure I stated that. So Councillor McElwain, I'm going to go back to you right now because you have a motion. I just wanted to remind you, if you want to put forward a motion to reconsider, if you could identify a date that we will be doing that, or a time frame that you'd like us to do that, that'd be great. The additional piece is, if you want staff to do any work on this, if you could include that in your motion as well, that would help our staff to have some direction as to what they want to do. So I'll just turn that over to you at this point, Councillor McElwain.
Thanks, Mayor. So a couple of comments first. I meant to mention in my previous comments, as relates to Councillor McCrae's comment about the Montrose Dam. When that came to the GRCA in 2018, the Region of Waterloo objected taking that off the books at that time, but they also at that time said that they had no need for that dam for at least 50 years. So I'm not sure that that's a relevant thing to be considering as far as this vote is concerned. But as far as just your comment just now, Mayor, I personally don't think this necessarily has to come from the bridge budget. I think it's a trails budget almost more than a bridge budget. So I don't think we need to increase the amount of money being spent on bridges here. It's more from our active transportation budget. So that was just a couple of comments I had before I make the motion. The motion is that, the other thing I think, I don't know what the schedule for demolition actually is, but I'm assuming we probably have to move fairly quickly to ensure that we have something in place in case Woolwich are planning on doing the demolition this fall yet. I don't know what that schedule is. So my motion is that the Township of Center Wellington reconsider our decision to remove the Middlebrook Bridge, and that we ask staff to come back to us with more details on the actual cost of removal versus rehabilitation for trail and bike use. And I think we need to do it kind of by November, I think, December at the latest, but I would suggest November. So that's not very good wording for a motion, but so let's just say November. Sorry.
I think that has all the elements in it, Councillor McWayne. I would understand what I'm voting for on that one. Are other councillors okay with that wording? Okay, can I get a Councillor? Can I get a seconder for that, Councillor Foster? Okay, any discussion on that motion to reconsider this bridge in at our November meeting? Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, and again, I know that staff weren't prepared and have the original proposal and document in front of them. But something Councillor Kitcher said tweaked my memory, that I thought somebody from Woolwich Township, when they made the joint presentation about this, had talked about trying to find a buyer. Am I remembering that correctly, Colin, or am I completely out to lunch?
Yeah, sorry. That's not, sorry about that, Councillor Dunsmore. That's kind of, at this point, that's out of order. We're in the debate, so
Okay.
Staff can't weigh in on this
Right.
point. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Any other comments from Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. Can we also add something in regards to, in that staff, so if it is approved, that staff find a budget or the appropriate budget and or donation or sponsorship program to save the bridge? It's kind of a friendly amendment that we're actually saying, if we're going to, if we reconsider it, that the staff not only say the EA, but also give options of what budget it would come from, and or if there's a, if this bike group wants to sponsor or fundraise towards saving for the 200,000.
Yeah, so that wouldn't be a friendly amendment, Councillor Van Leeuwen, because we're giving staff direction on something that we haven't, on a direction we haven't even approved yet, right? So I can see that coming out as a potential result if we go through the process and actually reconsider. If the motion to reconsider passes, then I can see that being kind of the next step if we go down there. Any other comments, questions from Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to speak in favor of this motion, and I note that even just now, we're already starting to do exactly what's proposed, which is to reconsider and have a second look at this matter. Councillor Van Leeuwen has just raised an excellent point, and that's exactly the kind of discussion that should occur in a reconsideration. So I'm speaking in favor of having seconded Councillor McElwain's motion. I'm speaking in favor of it, and I encourage all of us to support it. And let's have another look at this matter. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm very much in favor of another look.
Okay, so just to be clear, Council, we're not voting to reconsider at this point. We're voting to put forward a reconsideration motion at a council meeting in November. Okay, so as long as we're really clear on that. Okay, so we got a mover, Councillor McElwain, we got a seconder, Councillor Foster. All in favor of this motion to reconsider in November and have staff look at the costing? All in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much. I think staff have their direction. And again, to Stephanie. Thanks, Mark and Stephanie, for your delegation today. And hopefully at some point we'll be back live, but appreciate you using Zoom with us today, and have a good rest of the day. Feel free to stay with us for the rest of the meeting, but you don't have to. If we can get Councillor Vexatious back, I see he's back there now, and we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is consideration of reports. And 7.1, respectful interactions policy, and frivolous, vexatious, and unreasonable complaints policy. And at this point, I will turn it over to Rashid, our Manager of Human Resources. Welcome, Rashid.
Thank you very much, Mayor Linton and Council. So these two policies are written in response to providing consistency and fair treatment of our staff, our volunteers, members of council, consultants, at hands of members of public. So what does it mean? So we have a duty to provide a safe and healthy workplace to our staff, and interactions have to be respectful in any way. So that goes without saying. So any policy work around this subject is about that. And it's not about dealing with a difficult customer who disagrees with the municipality and all that. It's not about that. It goes into a lot of detail to provide reasons which could be considered, and the definitions of vexatious behavior or unreasonable behavior, or behavior which is disrespectful. I think disrespect is not tolerated in any workplace, so it shouldn't be over here at Central Wellington too. So both policies are self-explanatory, so I'm not going to take much time to explain that. They were attached with the agenda. I just also want to confirm that I have our legal advisors from SV Law, so Kevin Thompson and Jen McLean, to answer any questions, because we came together to draft these policies and they are vetted through our legal advisors. So I'll just stop there because I'll be able to answer any questions. And I wouldn't mind our CA to jump in where I have missed anything.
Kevin or Jen, do you have anything to add before we get into the questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing to add at this time. I'll just note that we were consulted in the drafting of these two policies. They were largely based off precedents from comparable municipalities that we scoured the internet for, and worked with Andy Goldie and Rashid to come towards finding a policy that we feel is the best fit for Central Wellington. Happy to answer any questions as the process goes forward.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll turn it over to Andy for his comments.
Yeah, thanks you, Mayor Linton. And just as Kevin and Rashid mentioned, this is something that's not unusual or uncommon in municipalities. We're seeing a number of municipalities going down the same policy scenario. We do see that over the period of years that staff are having to spend substantially more time addressing some of these issues being raised and consistently being questioned by some members of the public. I've had conversations with members of council that are quite concerned about some of the tones and constant questioning from the public, not only to staff, but to council members as well. And so this is where we started looking at research and finding out what other municipalities are doing. The policy before you is based on benchmarking some of the others, which Rashid has attached to the report. The main issue here is that what we're seeing is a growing number of these with regards to taking substantial staff time away from other projects and being able to respond. It's not to say we would not be responding. It's the fact that we respond, follow-up questions or concerns, questioning of what we've provided, and an ongoing back and forth with those discussions that meet the definitions of vexatious and frivolous. And so we bring this forward to council, not only as it is a staff issue, but it has been raised to me over the years from various council members as well of a concern, and wanting to make sure that we provide a respectful and trustworthy environment in working at the township for our staff and ensuring we're protecting them as part of our health and safety requirements as well. So I will look for answering any questions as well.
Thank you, Rashid, and thank you, Andy, and Kevin and Jen for that. And they're all available for questions of council right now. Let's turn it to council. Councillor Foster. Oh,
Thank
yeah,
you,
sorry,
Mayor.
sorry, Councillor Foster. Beverley, yeah, Beverley is registered as a delegation, so I'll give you the opportunity right now, Beverley, to speak to this matter. Welcome, Beverley, to our committee of the whole meeting.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So I'm going to pull up something to read and hope it doesn't obscure myself. Can you still see me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold, so having a little trouble with the speaking, but good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and councillors and staff present here. But I also wish to address the citizens who may be watching or may make reference to this video in future. First, I'd like to introduce myself, Beverley, Cairns, Henderson Street, Elora. I've lived here since 1974, and since then I have actively engaged with this wonderful community through work on the environment, the arts, and on heritage matters. I am the accredited area representative of the Architectural Conservancy Ontario Wellington Guelph branch, and though I am not a professional in this area, I try to keep myself informed on heritage matters mainly, but council initiatives in general. And I've done so since 2003, when I was a member of a committee of council seeking heritage designation for the Victoria Crescent area of Elora in which I live. I regard it important that we live in a participatory democracy. The time has gone by when we simply elect our municipal councillors for 4 years and expect them to do everything. In the structure of democracy, citizens have a strong role to play. We do not have to be on council or on committees to affect this. We ask that our council and staff administer within the laws set forth by the state, and we have a right to express ourselves to keep them to those laws in an informed way. To address these questions before you today, I put up, I would like the clerk to put up a letter that was sent to me, please. Gerrie? I've asked a letter to be posted for viewing.
Yeah, it's up there now, Beverley.
Is it there? Okay. So this was a letter that was sent to me to address a question before you today of the censoring of what is perceived as frivolous and vexatious interaction, first I ask, who is to judge what is frivolous or vexatious? In the attached document from 2014, you will see that I, along with Ian Rankin and Bob Jackson, were considered such. This letter was in response to interpretation of the Community Improvement Plan of 2014. I set it out as an example. Nothing has changed. It may shock the public to know that in the 15 years that I have interacted with this municipality, with this municipal government, neither I nor any colleagues have been invited to simply talk and sort out differences of interpretation with any member of the staff. I state here that, to my mind, we have the wrong focus today. It is not frivolous and vexatious submissions that we should be examining, but the root cause of the dissent and disillusion being felt by our township with our township administration today. The problem is leadership. During this council, there has been a focus on human resource problems, while the agendas that would actually alleviate strained interaction have been left by the wayside. For instance, I cite the urban design guidelines. A draft of the UDG, I'll just make an acronym of that, was rendered by MMM Associates at considerable cost to taxpayers in 2009. It has never been reintroduced during the following administrations. If we had the urban design guidelines today, we would not be deeply concerned over appropriate building, harmonious height, etc. in our municipalities. Developers would have to consult these guidelines, and the public would have the assurance of harmonious alteration and growth. Lying fallow are also the Greenland study, never implemented. The strategic action plan would outline with public consultation places to go in our community. I can only speak on the heritage front. There is the Heritage Act and the provincial policy statement and our own official plan, which state significant built heritage resources and significant cultural heritage landscapes shall be preserved. And yet we see manipulation of these provincial laws in our present administration that brings about civic action through letters and protests. Who is to hold the staff and council accountable but the citizens? Is this frivolous or vexatious? Let us deal with the root causes of criticism. Our leadership has not given us the weapons that we need to shelter ourselves against the predatory developers who want to build 6-story buildings or invasive, unrelated condos. Leadership is a skill. We cannot patch up a lack of leadership with a respectful bylaw, such as is being discussed today at council. My husband was a senior administrator in the United Nations. He dealt with very divergent opinions, as you can imagine, but they could not be shut out like flies in the summer by a bylaw or sprayed like undesirable mosquitoes. It takes skill to administer, to deal with divergent views, not only of the public, but of the council, and also to harness energy towards desirable goals. There are ways that you could be dealing with some of the people who I suspect you think are frivolous or vexatious by harnessing their energies in creative ways and giving them recognition for the wonderful commitment that they have towards bringing harmony and beauty to our municipality. Thank you for my presentation today.
Thanks very much for your delegation, Beverley. At this point, I will turn it over to questions of our council, starting with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. This policy that we're considering today is very, very troubling to me. I cannot help but feel that a vote to support this policy is a vote to silence the citizen, and it's a vote to squelch rather than encourage debate. Quite frankly, I have not seen the issues of vexatious and frivolous behavior that we're talking about here. I just haven't seen it. I fully believe the citizens should be allowed to approach us as councillors and our staff fully with rigorous discussion and debate. And I have observed how that is often silenced. And this policy will formalize that ability to squelch and silence our citizen. And that I can't support such a thing. Furthermore, this policy is premature. It's come up very quickly. It's come up out of left field. On the eve of hiring a new CAO, we're developing a policy that will hinder that new administration. And I think it's premature, and input from the new CAO is required. Furthermore, I don't see any constructive input from the public on this policy. And I don't believe even the public has fully had a chance to be consulted on it. As Madam Cairns aptly noted, democracy is participatory. And this policy will do the opposite of that. It's going to silence the citizen. And on that basis, I cannot support this policy. And I think it needs to be sent back to staff for full public engagement and input from the new CAO when that person should be in the chair. So I'm not in favor of this, Mayor.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, it's quite a policy, and in regards to respect and how we deal with one another and some of the matters within this policy, I can agree on the aspect that we need to treat everybody with respect. We need to ensure that whether it's a staff member, a citizen, or even councillors, but what we need to do, I think one of the most difficult parts of this is it needs lots of time to understand the full ramification of it. I can be completely honest, I would like more time to read this even for myself to ensure that we're not accidentally producing or allowing something that we weren't intending to. So as much as I agree very much, we don't want disrespectful behavior by citizens and or staff, or I would prefer to have a little more time with this document to read through it. I prefer to lay out some scenarios in my mind, and I would prefer to have the new CAO also chime into this document. So I would prefer to defer this document this time. Thanks.
Councillor McElwain.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with what has already been said by both Councillor Foster and Councillor Van Leeuwen. It needs public input. It needs time. It needs our new CAO to be involved. To me, this coming up right now when it is, I almost find this motion frivolous and vexatious, to be honest. I mean, we shouldn't be discussing this right at this time at all. It seems like an extension of the squeaky wheels term from a couple of years ago, and I don't think we should be treating citizens that way. And so if it is going to be considered at all, it needs to be deferred and getting proper input from the public and our new CAO. And in the meantime, I would like citizens to know that they're allowed to contact me as often as they want about their concerns and not be considered vexatious. Thank you.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd first like to say that these are actually two different policies, and they really should be separated and voted on separately. But I do agree with everybody that's spoken so far that these are incomplete. For me, the frivolous, vexatious, and unreasonable complaint policy is far too limited. Do we have a customer service policy, a public engagement policy that these could be included to balance the negativity of this? This is all focused on largely one-sided. It's not balanced. It doesn't have the public into it. It seems like something that is rubber stamped from other municipalities, and we don't know all the policies that they have to be coordinated with this. I just would like to ask, do we have a customer service policy? Do we have, we just voted last week to measure how we serve the public. So this policy looks very much like it's just copied from other places, cut and paste, pick what you like, and it's incomplete. It's too negative for me. To be a whole, I would like to refer it back to be a whole public engagement and to have metrics for this. To engage the public. Right now, this looks very, it doesn't look good to the public. It looks like we're trying to stop them. And I think we need to have a whole policy that, you know, how much time do we spend with developers? How much time do we spend with citizens? How much do we spend with certain stakeholders? So we know what that is. If we're spending days and weeks with developers, but we won't want to spend any time with a citizen that just is very passionate about an issue, well, how's that balanced? So we need to have it needs more input and more data on this. It feels very subjective and anecdotal because there is no metrics on this. Even though it's copied from other municipalities, this is this municipality. And as somebody that represents the public, I agree with Councillor McElwain. Anybody can ask me to represent them at any time about any issue. And thank you. I'd like to refer this back to the staff.
Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. My questions are for Kevin and Jen. Since we have lawyers in the meeting, let's get the legal advice. There's nothing in here that prevents the citizenry from engaging with councillors and/or staff. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Dunsmore, and through you, Mayor Linton. Correct. There's nothing that precludes engagement. I will say, as a point of clarification, there's nothing in here that deals with interactions with councillors. In your role as elected officials, you're free to engage the public. The public's free to engage you. How and when you respond to the public via email, via phone, that's your prerogative as an elected official. These policies are specifically geared at staff. And as employees of the municipality, we have to ensure that they are protected from harassing conduct and that their staff time is utilized properly. That's the basis for this. So just as a point of clarification, this does not in any way impact interactions between council members and the public.
Thank you. And so what we're talking about here is the way in which staff are communicated to and with when they interact with citizens. And by putting this policy in, we're trying to protect them from accusations and conspiracy theories and incompetency complaints. Is that a fair assumption?
The list is certainly non-exhaustive, and it's not intended to predict future scenarios. It's intended to be all-encompassing, to allow each individual situation to be assessed on its own merits, and to take action where needed to allow staff to feel safe in their workplace, to not feel harassed, and ultimately to avoid burnout and high turnover among staff.
Right. And so this policy has been brought forward. There was a notice of motion that I put in several months ago about a psychologically safe workplace. And Rashid, this is where it came from, correct? You were trying to follow up on that motion that came from council to assist our staff in having a psychologically safe workplace. Is that a fair assumption?
Thank you very much, Councillor Dunsmore. So yes, exactly. So like any other policy, when I was researching what's on agenda for the year, I looked at your notice of motion, your concern about mental health and well-being of staff. So we are trying to address that. This is one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. So it is about safety in the workplace. We have legislation to provide health and safety to all our workers, and they do not deserve to be disrespected or unfairly treated by anybody. So that's the protection here. It's not to stop anyone talking to staff who have legitimate requests and getting a response. Not agreeing to a conversation doesn't mean that they be put to this policy. It's about a very few minority of instances what's written in this policy to protect our staff. So that's the reason. So yes, mental health and well-being of staff is considered, and there's more work and more policy work coming after this one to have a respectful workplace policy in place in future. And few others we want to revisit because it's becoming a concern which could start costing us a lot with the mental health and the resources we have to spend, if we have higher turnover. So I'll just stop there and probably I answered that.
Mr. Dunsmore?
Yeah, so on that line, and you've researched this with other communities, and clearly you have evidence of that in your report by referencing other communities that have this policy in place already. We're pretty much obligated under the HR laws that are out there, and I'm thinking now Bill 168, that we have to protect our staff from these kinds of things. Is that correct?
I'll ask Bill 161. Kevin probably can answer that because I'm not familiar. But I would tell you under the ESA, under the OHS regulations, we have a responsibility to provide a safe workplace to our employees.
Kevin, did you want to comment on that legislation in this province?
Kevin?
Yeah, and I'm not up to speed on Bill 168 either, and I apologize, Councillor Dunsmore, so I don't have much further to add on it. I'll just echo the comment from Rashid that we do have an obligation to provide a safe workplace free of harassment. That's the law as it exists right now, but I don't have the specifics of 168 in front of me, unfortunately. I apologize.
Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I just have a comment. This policy is not about limiting freedom of speech. Instead, it is establishing acceptable behaviors regarding how we interact. This policy reminds all that certain behaviors, actions, or patterns of conduct may cause distress, disruption, or irritation without reasonable or justified cause. I appreciate the staff's challenges and also committee members. In my experience as a counselor, there is nothing more frustrating than being continually asked for assistance by someone who distrusts my response. Instead, my answers are dissected, taken out of context, and staff are requested to verify my comments, even though I identified I consulted staff beforehand to confirm my research. One wonders why they continue to seek my help, since what I provide is never enough and only elicits further requests. Recognizing this pattern and trying to survive scrutiny, I spend more time preparing a bulletproof response each time the individual asks. Meanwhile, other residents' inquiries and requests for assistance are piling up in my in-tray. Unfortunately, these proposed measures are needed, as this behavior is not acceptable when you're on the receiving end of these actions. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, councillors. I'm going to say something first, Councillor Kittredge, then I'll give other councillors an opportunity for a second comment. we're talking about a couple different things here, and I think we have to clarify what this policy is and what it is not. This is not about engagement. This is not about open government. But since some of the councillors have gone there, I'm just going to refresh your memory on what has happened since 2015 and how many new opportunities citizens have to engage. So this is not what we're talking about today. Since 2015, we have a brand new website that is very interactive. A lot of work went into that from our staff to make sure that we get widespread engagement from our people. We got into social media for the first time in 2015, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We make sure we get messages out to people and we give them an opportunity to get messages to us. We went out with Connect CW portal and we've received hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments from people across this community on projects and initiatives that matter to them. We have before COVID, we did 4 town hall sessions, well-attended sessions every single year. That was brand new. And hopefully we can get back to that because that's an opportunity for our citizens to directly interact with their government and their senior management team. Monthly updates and monthly and quarterly updates in the Wellington Advertiser newspaper about projects and initiatives that are important to our people. Weekly radio updates to talk about what we've done over the past week and over the past little bit. We now live stream all our council and committee meetings so that everybody has access to exactly who said what at all our council meetings. That was new in the last couple of terms of government because it's important for us, for people to hear what happens in their local government and what their local leaders are doing for them. Key projects open house. We have hundreds of people come to our key projects open house, and again, prior to COVID. And this is where we provide widespread engagement for all our citizens to have a say in the projects that matter to them across Centre Wellington. These are just some of the initiatives that we have put in place over the last couple terms of council because it's absolutely critical to us that we have widespread engagement across our town and that people have a say in how we spend their tax dollars and how we invest our money in our resources to do good things for this committee. So let's not talk about that we don't have engagement because we have more engagement now than we've ever had in the past. What we're talking about here is a policy to protect our staff. Council has an obligation to protect our staff from unreasonable emails and calls, disrespectful, frivolous and vexatious behavior. There's a threshold for that. My inbox is filled with things that have come to me that also come to our staff. We have to do what we can as members of council to protect our staff, and we need a policy to do that. I wish we didn't, but we do. And we have to do whatever we can to look after the mental health of our staff. That's our job as council. And this policy should have probably been in place 3, 4, 5 years ago, but we're getting to it now, and better late than never. It's really important that we protect our staff because if this wasn't required, then we wouldn't be moving ahead with this. This has nothing to do with engagement. This has nothing to do with shutting people down. This only has to do with those repeatable questions and responses that Councillor McCrae was talking about. Our staff are excellent staff. They want to respond to things with excellence, with complete information, but they cannot continue to respond to some of these requests that they're getting when they're disrespectful and they're vexatious, and it pulls them away hundreds of hours it takes them to respond to many of these concerns and these complaints, and it pulls them away from doing the job that council asks them to do. This is not about customer service. This is about protecting our staff, and we have to do that. It's my role. It's our role as council to make sure that our staff are protected. And to me, this is a critical policy that we have to move ahead on. And I really would like us to have a recorded vote for this one because this is something that I think citizens should be aware of how we voted on this item. So that's all from me. Any other comments from council? Councillor Kittrus.
Thank you, Mayor. I was wondering if Rashid could say, do we have a workplace violence policy in place right now, which is Ministry of Labor. Do we have that?
Rashid?
Councillor Kitris, I was actually looking for policies. I've seen the heading. I haven't read it yet. So it's a document. I was actually looking at what existed. And I also was looking at other code of conducts and everything today. So I'm making myself familiar, but I have to just check if the document is a council policy or is it a procedural document.
Follow on, Councillor Kitris?
I think that this is I know the workplace violence policy is required by law. And so I'm just wondering whether this it could be combined with it. I still would like to make a motion to refer this back to staff for a complete public engagement policy, that this there is some sort of recorded, you say hundreds of hours. That's a lot of hours. That, you know, that needs to be verified that it's hundreds of hours. And I would like to know that and understand that before we vote on this. So I'd like to send this back to staff to verify these statements with actual data. And also, I would like to have this policy come when the new CAO, perhaps he has some enlightening things that could be added to this. So I'd like to refer this back to staff until that time.
Okay, so we will get back to that referral, because referral kind of trumps any other motion at this point, but I will allow any further comments to be made short of dealing with the referral. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I've served on this council now for 7 years, and in the 3 years ended, I've seen nothing frivolous or vexatious on the part of any citizen. What I have seen is questions that are not answered, questions that the answer has what we all call spin, legitimate, honest business questions about our municipality are unanswered. And that is what triggers the emails and the resulting inquiries from citizens that we're talking about here. I agree with Madam Cairns. Democracy has to be participatory, and this policy is going to eliminate that participatory democracy. It appears that a few citizens who advocate for certain issues are the target of this policy, and that, quite frankly, is reprehensible. I think this policy is premature. I think the new CAO needs to have input. It appears that this policy is resulting from questions that are often spun or unanswered, and I have seen nothing that's frivolous or vexatious on the part of any citizen. And I think this needs to be defeated as it sits. It's premature. The public has had no input on it, and it's an attempt to squelch dissent and stifle debate. And that's going to be the legacy of this council if we pass a policy like this. Cut off the citizen from their democratic government, stifle debate, and squash discussion. Terrible, terrible legacies. It's time, Mayor, to call this question. Everyone's spoken about it. Let's call the question.
Thanks for your advice. I'll continue to respond to other councillors, so they have as much opportunity to speak as you've had, Councillor Foster. Councillor Dunsmore.
If Councillor Foster's finished with his campaign, I'd like to mention that we have to follow this because it's legislated by the provincial government to protect our staff. I know there is a harassment policy in place somewhere in the township, because at the previous HR head and her and I had a long conversation about it. But when it comes to mental health, particularly in this community, we have to be more proactive. This is not stifling debate. This is not quelching democracy. This is just saying we need to do it in a manner that respects everybody. But I hear something on this council which causes me great concern right now. Every time we bring up something that's a little bit controversial, we want to now leave it for the next CAO. You are essentially declaring this council lame duck, not because of an election, but because we have a CAO who's retiring. And quite frankly, the next CAO, Councillor Kistrus, it may as well be a she as a he, and they may have a different of opinion. And we can change those policies when he or she comes into place. But right now we have an obligation to protect our staff, to follow the laws of this province, and we should be voting on this now, not deferring it and not leaving it to a new CAO.
Councillor McAway?
Point of order, Mayor.
Councillor Foster, what's your point of order?
I've just been named and I believe I should have a chance to respond when I've been named in this manner by Councillor Dunsmore.
Yeah, no,
I'd like
that's
to
not a
speak.
point of order. I'll go to the next person. Thank you very much for your advice. Councillor McAway?
Thanks, Mayor. I don't disagree that we need to protect our staff. That is the law and it makes sense, and every company has some kind of staff protection in place or should have. So I have no problem with that. But that isn't what this document does. And that's why it needs to be deferred and has public input and input from our new CAO. Statements like submission of obsessive requests with high volume and frequency of correspondence, that has nothing to do with protecting our staff. Harassing the township with, which could include very high volume and frequency of correspondence, that has nothing to do with protecting our staff. That is shutting down citizens' opportunities to discuss things with staff. And so it needs to be changed. It can't go forward the way it is written today. That's the bottom line. Protecting our staff and this document are two very separate issues right now.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. I very much see the need for us working forward with something like this. So, and I think that that's where I want to be very clear. Like I've seen where we can go through and answer questions and then re-answer questions and then re-answer questions, very similar in nature or sometimes even carbon copy. So I can see the idea where we can be using staff time and aspects of it. And yet there are things that we've written into this. For example, it's called the managing director's responsibilities, which is if you look under there, it says the request has been dealt with properly and in line with the relevant procedures. What are those relevant procedures? Do we have procedures for customer service? And so that gets back to sort of like Councillor Kitrus's. If I was to do this or any other person was to do this in their corporation, we all have what's called violence and harassment policies in-house. So Rashid, you know this. I know you say you've seen the heading, you know it's there, and I know it's there, and I can appreciate. This is where we're dealing with our customers, if you want to put it that way. And we are responsible to the municipality, to the township who actually employ us. I would look at this and I say, yes, we need to deal with this. Yes, there's opportunities here. There are some things that need to be done right. What is the relevant procedure? Is the CAO able to conduct this process through in a legible aspect? You can put processes in place where a management team has no ability to actually function because there's no guidelines set. We need to have those guidelines set in a customer service process. We need to understand the relevant procedures. And then I actually can vote in favor of this because that is what is key here. I don't want to put something forward and then all of a sudden it becomes subjective. So please, let's not force this to a vote. But I would say let's get a few pieces in order and let's move forward. So that's my recommendation. Thanks.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I was just going to add that I reached out to the Ontario Ombudsman's office to discussed the issue and was advised that having such a policy is something they would support. And in fact, they themselves have one in place. But I have to say, listening to what Councillor Van Leeuwen's suggesting, yeah, I certainly agree with Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. As I stated in the beginning, I like these two policies separated because they are very different. The second policy, which we haven't actually got to yet, which is the respectful interactions policy, that one relates directly to the violence in the workplace. And that we haven't even really discussed. We've discussed the first one a lot. And I think that they're really two different policies. The one where you want to have safe and is in that respectful interactions policy. And that's why it's different than the frivolous, vexatious, unreasonable complaints policy. And I feel very strongly, and that is exactly what Councillor Van Leeuwen, and I would agree with him about customer service and all these other things. That one, the frivolous and vexation needs to be part of a larger public engagement and customer service policy. And that needs to be referred back to staff and the new CAO if that needs to be done.
Okay, so all councillors have an opportunity to speak several times. So we'll go to Councillor Kittrus's referral. So if you can move that referral, Councillor Kittrus.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to refer this back to staff and that they come back with a comprehensive public engagement and customer service policy for that includes this frivolous, vexation, and unreasonable complaints policy. And secondly, that the respectful interactions policy is part of the violence in the workplace policy and include mental health as included in that. And I don't think it's outrageous to have the new CAO comment on that either. So that's why I'd like to refer this back.
Okay, councillors, do we know what the referral is all about? Can I get a seconder for that, please? Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor of the referral? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you, Kevin and Jen, for being with us today. And thanks to Rashid for your work on this. And we'll see this again at some point. Moving on to next item on the agenda, little thing like council remuneration. So it's about the 2022 council remuneration review, and I will turn it back over to Rashid.
Well, thank you very much. I guess this one would go easy. So this is about council remuneration, and as per written in our bylaw, we go to market every 4 years. And last time, before my time, there was a compensation review committee of the citizens, and also we had a consultant help out. So I have looked at all that paperwork, and because it's due, so I just wanted to seek some direction from council, and I provided three options. The options are in this report. Basically, either you direct the staff to again come up with a compensation review committee and a consultant to do this work. Second option could be HR department and the consultant can do this work. And lastly, just giving as an option that all the increases stay as per COLA increases as staff gets, and we don't do review this year because of pandemic and all that. So this is just about the quantity of work, not refusing to work. So there's three different options for council to choose from.
So council should like this. There's no recommendation for staff and just three options for us to decide. So that's what we like here, it seems. So I'll give councillors the opportunity to speak. And if you could just, you've read the report, so just give an indication of the option that you prefer and give us your thoughts, that'd be great. And we'll start with Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I'm in favor of option 3. Let's not spend a lot of time on this. And in fact, knowing that we're challenged with finding revenue, I'm thinking what Councillor Dunsmore was going to mention is I'd be fine with not any increase, just to show that council is committed to trying to help the community in terms of let's not take a pay increase.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I'm in favor of number 3. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time and work on this. And, Councillor McCray and I did have a conversation earlier in the week that, if times are tough and we're going to have difficulty keeping that budget within 2.4. So if this will help very little, but every little bit helps. So I'm okay holding our salaries where they are.
Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. Generally, I think that I would probably do for option 3. The reason I do have a question for Rasid. I was wondering if we were going to be using, if we did pick the first one or the second one, whether we would use the same consultant as we used last time.
Rashid?
Thank you, Councillor Kittredge. So I haven't looked at, I think I know who's been used previously. Is there an issue? I have no idea or no decisions made who we would use.
Councillor Kittredge, just be careful on what you say about an individual consultant here. Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. There was some difficulties with the previous presentation, and it was voted down in council, and I had to put forward a notice of motion to give a different compensation that illustrated the proper compensation that so that we wouldn't be at a loss. So I'm just concerned about using the same one.
Councillor McElwain?
I'm happy with option 3 and/or as councillors McCray and Dunsmore, no raise for the next year is also completely acceptable and possibly the best alternative.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor. I would say option 3 as well, but I would think that now that we've heard from enough people, we should make a motion that we as council take no raise for the coming year.
Councillor Foster?
I'm in favor of option 3. Cost of living adjustment only is fully acceptable. I'm not in favor of hiring another consultant to do another study. Option 3 is on the table. It's completely acceptable to me.
Okay, and I'd also be in favor of option 3. I think from a budgeting perspective, council always has the ability as we go into budget to say, based on option, even though we've approved option 3, we're not going to take an increase for this year. So I'd suggest that we have that conversation at budget time as we go through this. Right now, we're just looking at one of those 3 options, if that's okay for council. I can read the recommendation here. The Council of the Township of Center Wellington directs staff by choosing option 3 in the report for the council compensation review. Can I get a mover for that, please? Councillor Kittredge, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks, Council. Moving on to 7.3, appointment to Grand River Nonprofit Housing Corporation. And I'm going to read the recommendation. And Lisa's here to answer any questions that you might have on this, but I'll get the recommendation on the floor that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington confirm the appointment of Jim Brand as a Class A Director for the Grand River Nonprofit Housing Corporation Board. Can I get a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor Kittrus. Any questions about that? All in favor? And that's carried. 7.4, partial demolition of a listed property on 6550 Gerrie Road in Elora, and I'll turn it over to Mariana, our senior planner. Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you to members of council. The report before you concerns the demolition, partial demolition of a rear addition, a one-story rear addition at the property known as 6550 Gerrie Road in Elora. The matter of the property is listed on the Municipal Heritage Register. As such, council approval is required for any demolition of any portion of the structure. So this went to the Heritage Committee on October 12th at its meeting. And the committee had no objections to the demolition. It wasn't considered to have any heritage value. It's a one-story rear addition that is at the rear of the property between the existing stone house, which was constructed in the mid-19th century, and the two-story garage, two-bay garage that is at the back. So the purpose of the demolition is to help to facilitate the construction of a new addition in its place that would be slightly larger. So there's some information included in the report, some photographs and plans. And again, the Heritage Committee had no concerns with this demolition, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mariana. I'll just get the recommendation on the floor and then I'll turn it to council. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approves the partial demolition request for the one-story rear addition to the dwelling at the listed property known as 6550 Gerrie Road, Elora in the Township of Center Wellington, and that the property remains on the Municipal Heritage Registry as a non-designated listed property. Mover for that, please. Councillor McCray, second by Councillor McElwain. Any questions from council? All in favor? And that is carried. We're going to take a couple-minute break and then we'll get to 7.5 at 2:45. See you in a minute. Okay, hopefully we're back at it here. It's 2:50. And the next item that we have on our agenda is 7.5 gravel road condition assessment, something that was information report that was requested by council. And I will turn things over to Colin, our Managing Director of Infrastructure Services. Welcome, Colin.
Yep, thanks, Mayor Linton. And just as a quick introduction, I just wanted to refresh council's memory with just a couple things from the strategic plan. So this work has been ongoing for a little while now, and it started during the strat plan process. Council wanted staff to look at reinvesting in the rural road system. So strategic direction number 5 really addresses that. So looking at increasing rural road maintenance levels and also focus on the rehabilitation of rural roads, prioritized in accordance with a road needs study and asset management plan. So staff brought forward a report back in 2019. And as a result, Committee of the Whole at that time passed the following resolution, so that council directs staff to bring forward a report outlining the historical data, current condition of the gravel roads within the township, provides estimates and an estimated time frame to bring all gravel roads to a satisfactory state, and that a gravel road management system be established. So really the work over the last, since that resolution was passed, we've been kind of working away at that, and just in the report presented some of the historical funding data for the gravel road system, and you'll see in attachment 1 and attachment 2 just some of the historic funding, whether it be with paved roads and gravel roads in attachment 1, and just the gravel road maintenance budget. So we've certainly, as you can see from these graphs, increased the investment over the last 3 years. And I think with that, we also retained the services of Mr. David Anderson, who's joining us today. And Dave is with 4 Roads Management. And Dave has been working in the municipal sector for over 30 years and has a pretty vast level of experience with all things roads, from the maintenance side of things to the capital constructions to assessments. And so Dave is going to walk us through a number of slides and just kind of looking at our gravel road system from an asset management perspective. And then some of the findings from the gravel road condition assessment work, and then the recommendations coming out of the assessment. So I think with that, Dave, I'll hand things over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Colin. Let's get started here. Okay. First of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to provide this presentation, and thanks very much also for the opportunity to do the work. So, Mr. Mayor, members of council, it was an interesting project looking at gravel roads in isolation as an asset group. So we'll go through the findings, and the way I've tried to arrange this report is similar in terms of what we might expect to produce in terms of an entire asset management process. And I think when we go through this, you'll see that this goes together, and I try to blend the information in with what the regulatory requirements are within Ontario. So we'll talk a little bit about the scope, asset management in Ontario, a bit of a high-level overview. That high-level overview will then dovetail with some of the things that we're going to recommend and the perspective that we're looking at this from. Requirements to develop a work plan, again, relates to Regulation 588.17, which is asset management for municipalities in Ontario. Talk about the budget program and plan development through performance modeling, which reading, again, the regulation closely, part 4 of the asset management plan basically steers you in the direction of creating an asset management plan through performance modeling. And then we'll talk about, in relationship to all of that, what comes out of it in terms of Center Wellington specific measures. So the scope was to review the condition of all the gravel roads. But in looking at the condition, we also pick up the dimensional information, et cetera, in terms of the platform width and the surface widths. And we make a number of data entries in terms of ratings for condition ratings for, the number of substandard hills and the drainage, et cetera. What it ends up being is we get times of need, if you will, or indicators in 6 critical areas for geometry, structural adequacy. Structural adequacy is distress, drainage, surface width, surface type, and capacity. So there aren't any capacity problems. They're all low volume roads. So the state of the infrastructure and asset management plan for gravel roads report will have summary information in a tabular format. We provided a PDF version of the report. It'll include budget recommendations and a work plan based on the current budget. And in keeping with what I said a slide or two ago there, we've developed the work plan using a performance model. So based on the current condition and the current funding, we can anticipate how the system may perform over time at that funding level. My background experience is, as Colin alluded to, over 30 years working for municipalities, and I've been consulting for almost 15 on top of that. So I've covered a lot of Ontario, so from very small municipalities to quite large municipalities. So I think we have adequate resources and experience and expertise in this area to be addressing the Centre Wellington road system. Asset management, there's a definition, there's many definitions. It depends on agencies. I used to carry about 12 definitions in here, but when I do it for training for other purposes, but from the Transportation Association of Canada, and they adopted a definition from the US Department of Transportation. Asset management is a framework for making cost-effective resource allocation, programming, and management decisions. It combines engineering principles with sound business practices and economic theory and provides the tools to facilitate a more organized, logical, and comprehensive approach to decision-making. So regardless if this came from the Transportation Association of Canada, that basic definition can be applied to all assets. So I mentioned there that there's lots of agencies with lots of definitions, but the key themes to all of the definitions are about being effective, efficient, good management, strategic decision-making. It's always about the money and what's required to maintain the condition system, condition service levels, and optimizing the asset life cycle. And definitely it's asset management or risk. Asset management is a risk management exercise from a number of perspectives too. From the physical perspective and from the financial perspective. So both of those things play heavily into the decision making. So from a very high level, municipalities are in the business of delivering services. Just about every service that you deliver is dependent upon assets, whether it's roads, bridges, water, wastewater, rec facilities, fleet. You use your fleet to deliver the road services and to a certain extent the rec services, et cetera, fire, and so on. So your service delivery is dependent upon assets. So it's then incumbent on us that having all the assets in good condition is key and pivotal to ensuring service delivery. Almost every aspect of service delivery is under the asset management umbrella. So everything that we do, we're only going to talk about the gravel roads component of the road system, but just about everything that we touch in the municipal environment would fall under that asset management umbrella. We are provided direction about asset management from Regulation 588-17, which came into effect on December 27th, 2017. What it requires is it used to be a requirement to have the asset management plan for core assets by July 1st, 2021. That got changed earlier this year to 2022. And the core assets are the roads, structures greater than 3 meters, water, linear and treatment, wastewater, linear and treatment, and stormwater, which is a form of wastewater as well, linear and treatment. So this project, as Colin alluded to, moves the township towards that goal. Regulation 588-17 requires a description of the municipality's approach to assessing the condition of the assets in a category. So we have followed the Ministry of Transportation's inventory manual for municipal roads. The essence of the report and those 6 times of need or 6 critical areas are derived from following that manual. One of the other things that's required in 588-17, and I've underlined a few key points here, and we've got a bit of lead time because the asset management plan isn't due until next July. However, you need to have a plan for each of the 10 years of the 10-year plan. And the assessment and the creation of the plan it has to be developed using item number 4 there, the life cycle activities referred to in subparagraph 2 that can be undertaken for the lowest cost to maintain the current levels of service. So what that really translates is into doing the right treatment at the right time, with the goal being to maintain the current levels of service. And by level of service, I would take it to mean that they meant the condition of the asset group. So again, you can apply this not to just roads, but to any asset. The primary goal has to be to maintain the condition of the assets over time. So I would suggest that to adequately do this, that you need a performance modeling software. And to that end, Center Wellington does have software to do performance modeling. So this is a cut and paste from a document the province produced in 2012, but the messages are pretty clear and pretty appropriate on this continuing basis. So I've underscored there, asset management requires a thorough understanding of the characteristics and condition of infrastructure assets, as well as the service levels expected from them. So at the bottom, though, I've underscored, finally, it requires the development of a financial plan, which is the most critical step in putting the plan into action. So asset management requires that understanding of what work we have to do in what time frame and what that costs. And then the financial plan falls into place. A lot of agencies are doing the opposite, where they're saying, well, our budget is X, and we're going to make a plan to meet the budget. But if the plan to meet the existing budget doesn't maintain the condition of assets, all we really have is an underfunded plan, which is really a plan to fail. And asset management is definitely a team effort, and it's a cross-discipline department interaction is required. So it has to be created, whether it's in the fire department, the roads department, public works rather, and finance is pivotal to each one of those departments. So the asset management plan has to have a funding level that will sustain the assets over time. There's a lot of regulations that affect asset management. 588-17 is one of the drivers in asset management, but we have a lot of regulations that would have to be followed and have to be followed already on a continuing basis to execute the construction and maintenance activities that we have as part of our service delivery. I'm not going to read through those. They're just more or less there for reference information. So a work plan is required for the core assets as of July 1st. The plan has to be adequately funded. The plan has to sustain or improve the condition of the assets over time. The plan has to firstly select the lowest cost activity at the correct condition. So that means we got to do the right treatment at the right time. And those are the key takeaways from Regulation 588-17. And my little cartoon says, bad planning is buying a new saddle for an old horse. And really, and that was given to me by the head of a finance department of another client, which really reflects the message. So really, yes, we can pave or resurface a road in almost any condition, but we'd be wasting our money by paving a road that is in poor condition now, when really that's an activity that should be undertaken, a straight overlay or paving job when it's in a much better condition. We will talk about that a little further on in the presentation. So what do we need to develop a plan? And this is the essence of what we did in the report. You have software. The information that I've provided can be imported into your software. We have a condition rating format or methodology. As I said before, we're using the inventory manual. We have condition data that was collected in late March of this year. We've looked at that condition data in conjunction with the widths of the road, with the drainage, et cetera, and made recommendations for treatments and assigned some costs based on based on the standardized costing and inventory manual or estimates. And we've created some agency-specific costs to deal with treatments that might be beneficial to Center Wellington. We need an asset class and a deterioration curve. So an asset class is just a group of assets that should perform about the same because they got the same surface, same traffic, et cetera. And then we need the budget. We have to develop a budget. Software selection, that's that first step. So, Township of Center Wellington already has an enterprise software solution. We need to have a rating methodology, which we do have, the inventory manual. We've rated the condition of the roads through that methodology. Once we have all that data collected, and I've taken these bullets from a document called the Infra Guide from the early 2000s, but what we really want to know is what do we have, where's it located, what condition is it in, what's recommended improvement and its cost, what's the current value, remaining useful life, and replacement costs. And I think when you go through the report, and I know there's quite a bit of reading there, you will see that we've covered off, in essence, every one of those items in the report. So what do we have? Well, this is the gravel component of the road system, so about 196 kilometers. And then we've classified the roads on the second graph by traffic volume, and that's per the inventory manual. The inventory manual is produced by the Ministry of Transportation. It identifies widths and surface types of certain roads that are required based on traffic volume, and the widths, et cetera, all align with the geometric design standards for Ontario and for TAC. So it all kind of lines up that way. So we've broken it down, and primarily we're looking at roadside environments or classifications, et cetera. So this is where is it located. So we did produce as part of this project an overall map with segmentation to show the assets that we've dealt with in the report in Center Wellington. The segment condition is established through the rating methodology. The improvement needs are established through the evaluation process and what the principal defects are. So the system rating can be considered a level of service measure. So when you update your asset management policy, which was required a couple of years ago now, level of service has to be spoken to. So every asset should have multiple levels of service measures. So there should be an average of all ratings. There should be a weighted average is what my preference is. What that accounts for then, if I weight the average, is I'm looking at if every road section were the same length, that would be fine to just use the average. But since the segments are different lengths, a weighted average gives us a better read on what the actual condition is. And the system adequacy is another measure which was historic. Ministry of Transportation used to use that when they provided conditional grant funding. And really all it was the ratio of the good, fair, and excellent assets to the entire system. So what that means, if you were 75% adequate, meant 25% of your road system was in poor condition. I'll speak about that again later in a slide or two, but it can be a misleading measure in some ways, because you could have 100% adequacy, and the difference between a poor road and a good road, the breakpoint's a score of 35, say. If all the roads scored 36, it's 100% adequate, but next year it would be 0% adequate because of the deterioration. It's moved down 1 point. So that one has to be viewed in concert with other level of service measures. So your system target can vary by the agency profile, whether it's regional, local, or provincial. And it's up to you as an agency to make a determination of what's the best level of service and what's appropriate for your agency. So I've listed a number of levels of service in the report, and how did I come up with this? Well, I used the Pavement Asset Design and Management Guide from Transportation Association of Canada. This is a kind of an interesting graph because we can apply the concept to a lot of different assets. But what's interesting is it has no numbers. So you can apply whatever pavement or rating methodology that you have to it. So in this case, we're using the inventory manual, which basically scores a distress out of a number out of 20, which is harder to understand. Multiply by 5, we have a number out of 100. The trigger value for a pavement rehab is around 70. So that suggests then that the target level for service should be above 70. So that's the essence of how I arrived at that condition recommendation, or one of the condition recommendations. Similarly, you could apply that to bridges and look at your BCI, Bridge Condition Index, and say what's the trigger point for a rehab, and so on, and start to apply that to come up with some level of service measures. So what condition is it in? It's just a hair above what we would call a 1 to 5 year need, meaning that there's in this case, with the weighted average, you're looking at somewhere in the range of 10 years. If no further money was expended, the entire gravel road system would be in poor condition within 10 years. So that makes it incumbent on us to spend the right amount at the right time. Some of the numbers in this, and I have a slide, a bullet on one slide that speaks of this too, is the spring of 2021 was not as harsh a spring in terms of spring breakup on gravel roads as other years have been. And a couple of the roads had some work done to them in terms of regrading by the time I got around to them. So I think we hit the majority of the roads in their prime breakup period. It only lasts for 3 or 4 days, but those would explain why maybe the ratings here are a bit higher than maybe you'd anticipated. So we're going to talk for a few minutes about condition, because that's one of the bullets that we had earlier, and the system adequacy is 74.9. One of the things with the inventory manual methodology, though, is automatically anything less than 50 cars a day is adequate. So if I remove that factor, then your system adequacy would be 67.8. Which is still above the target that the ministry used for township type municipalities from 1995 and earlier. However, as I said, it can be a bit misleading measure because that's just a ratio of the good, fair, excellent roads to the poor roads. So 32.2% of the roads are in poor condition, but then you've got roads that are in essentially fair condition as well, which then sort of gives you a different perspective on the overall condition. The next measure, the weighted average condition. So I've taken the structural adequacy and multiplied it by 5, number out of 100, 58.24. Based on that graph that I showed a couple of slides ago, we typically recommend a minimum structural adequacy of 70. So from that perspective, the condition is below target, and similarly with the good to very good roads. When measured by that structural adequacy distress measure, and there's a table in the report, probably number table 15 or something like that. It's towards the end of the tables in the executive summary. So capacity is a measure in the inventory manual, but it's not an issue on your gravel road system. So overall, the system condition requires improvement to meet the recommended targets that I'm recommending. It's up to you as an agency to make your own level of service recommendations. And as I've said, that system adequacy can be a little misleading. So I usually recommend multiple service measures for any asset to try and establish or get a better read on what the true condition is. So what we looked at or observed in the field is semi-urban roads. So semi-urban roads would be roads like you find in Salem, for instance, where there is development on both sides of the road, but it looks like a rural cross section. So those are referred to as semi-urban in the manual. The manual designates that a semi-urban road that does not have a hard surface is a now need, meaning it has, and the defect, even although it may be performing well in every other aspect, by that measure, it has to have a hard surface as a semi-urban road. A lot of the roads are, they have ditches, but there's a lot of roads where the ditch is not quite up to the standard that's required in the manual. So ideally, what we're looking for is a ditch that's about 1 meter below the center line elevation of the road. So by that measure, there's spot drainage required on quite a few road sections. There's 1 or 2 road sections where I understand there's water over the road problems too, which would be a now need. Surface width is a measure that's also made in the manual, and 3.8% or 8 kilometers of road system should be signed as narrow road, put up an advisory sign. Understanding, of course, that we can't fix every road at once, but now that we're aware that they're a bit too narrow for the speed limit, putting up an advisory sign means we've done our diligence. And there are 110, 111 kilometers of road sections with potentially substandard vertical and horizontal alignment that should be reviewed for signage. As I said earlier, the spring of 2021 was not as severe as other years, so evaluations might be slightly skewed higher than you might think the road system is. And some roads had been graded prior to the inspection. And just to note that, when we live on a gravel road, even a gravel road in good structural condition is going to have a wet surface material at times, and it will be dirty. That doesn't mean it's not functioning. So our principal observations for gravel roads have to be done during the spring breakup period, because what we're really looking at is the percentage of the length of the road that exhibits soft spots or frost boils. So that's really the measure that defines the amount of distress and gives us that score. So out of the analysis, we've looked at using your current unit costs. The inventory manual has some standardized formula to represent the cost of an improvement on the road. Typically, the formulas all include allowances for engineering, contingency, whether it's a rocky terrain and things like that. We have made some modifications. As you'll see down the side, we have rec, which is a standard improvement, and then we have rec gravel. So what we tried to do was understand that the low volume roads we would leave as gravel. The majority of the roads, though, the treatments that we've recommended will convert the gravel road to a hardtop road. We'll talk more about that in a slide or two as well. So the roads, the treatment improvements that say GRR, SD are gravel road improvements, and the SDs are just spot drainage and or severe flooding problem. So those are the basic designations of the treatments that we have there. And you'll notice that we have the semi-urban double surface treatment upgrade and semi-urban hot mix asphalt upgrade. So for most of the roads in Salem, for instance, the recommendation is a double surface treatment upgrade. So remove some of that material that's on top, put some clean granular A or granular A that meets spec, and double surface treat it. I think that can work in most of those roads. Towards the east side, though, of Salem, there didn't seem to be a lot of room to fit in a ditch. So the recommendations changed to our reconstruction nominal sewer, or the reconstruction with storm sewers, because as I said, I don't think we could fit in ditching with the existing houses and road cross section, things like that. So most improvements with a road that has less than or greater than 100 cars a day or vehicles a day will result in a hard top surface. So typically, this is what I meant by a deterioration curve when I talked earlier. For a gravel surface road, if you don't do anything to it, it will deteriorate reasonably quickly. At the top end of the curve, we do less expensive activities. We regrade it in dust control. We do gravel road resurfacing. As the condition gets worse, it requires more expensive activities to bring it back up to condition, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about deterioration also in slides that are coming up. So replacement cost of our assets is, $100 million, and the current estimated value based on condition is $73 million. So it doesn't include storm or sanitary treatment or linear costs, sidewalk costs, bridges, or culverts. So, and I've got a cut and paste in there from the report that says basically the same thing at the bottom. Regulation 588.17 requires that these service measures be included in the report. So we've done that. And basically it just looks at the area of the municipality versus the lane kilometers of collector, arterial, and local roads. So that's all that's telling us. I'm not quite sure how that will be used. And we have to talk about how we develop the budget. So I've been using this approach basically probably over 20 years since I was a municipal person. And basically I look at what can we do in the long term, what has to be done, because ultimately we will have to replace the road. So we have to provide some kind of dollar value for what does that mean. The replacement cost, is it over 50 years or 75 years? For the purposes of this report, it is the long-term sustainability is a measure of the cost, replacement cost of the road system, but over 50 years. So that translates into an annual funding level. And then I also calculate the annual cost for preservation and resurfacing programs, and I call that the short-term sustainability funding level. So ideally, if you're at that short-term sustainability funding level, you should be able to meet Regulation 588.17. I've referenced here more of a generic way of looking at it from if we were looking at the entire road system, because I include, you know, crack sealing, hot mix resurfacing, single surface treatment, et cetera, and gravel road resurfacing. In the case here, we're really talking about gravel road resurfacing on that annualized basis. And the funding window is between the short and long term and sustainability levels. And really how we think about things going forward will amount to a paradigm shift. Because traditionally we've thought in terms of capital and operating, and from an asset management perspective, we should maybe start thinking about those things from a reinvestment amount. If you had a system that was experiencing significant growth and a lot of subdivisions, all those subdivisions would need resurfacing at about the same time. If you artificially limited the amount of resurfacing every year for whatever reason, then you will miss the opportunity to do the right treatment on those roads. So basically, we're looking at $2 million a year for the annualized long-term sustainability based on the replacement costs that we talked about earlier, and 1.4, close to 1.5 million a year for gravel road resurfacing. And that's based on resurfacing gravel roads every 3 years with 75 millimeters of gravel. That standard was what we used to use for funding, or when the ministry provided conditional grant funding up until 1995. So we have to use something as a level to illustrate what funding or what we anticipate might be required. So the short-term sustainability is that close to 1.5 million. Graphically, looking at this, we've tried to put a bunch of information in here. We've got our long and short-term sustainability funding levels. We have our current funding level, which is about $1 million, which is less than that short-term sustainability. And I've approached this from two ways. I've just looked at what the gravel road resurfacing is, and I've run a model, as you'll see in a slide or two, to maintain the system, which comes out to a kind of a similar number. It's 1.36 or 38 million. The dark black line on the graph illustrates the condition of the system over time. So the current funding, at the current funding level, it will take a significant period of time to start to improve the condition. And that assumes absolutely everything is done correctly and the performances of the road system will be as we anticipate. The light blue line in the background is kind of an interesting line too, because for municipalities, we have this annual funding, which is kind of a fixed amount that increases with inflation. But if we And what we're trying to do then is match a current budget. If we said, let's match the current condition or maintain the condition, you can see wild extremes here in what funding is required to maintain the condition. So the total annual budget to maintain fluctuates quite a bit, which really wouldn't work too well in a municipality. We're more on that fixed annual budget. So then we have that black line that illustrates system performance, and then the blue line is a budget required to maintain a flat line the condition performance. So in the software that I've used, I've just done this screen capture, and what I've tried to illustrate here is that your current funding for gravel road resurfacing, if we said, you know, the ideal is to do 75 millimeters every 3 years, you're really at a funding level that suggests you're funding at 75 millimeters every 5 years. So that's 3 inches every 5 years, which just pause to reflect on what that may be. So performance modeling, moving through the stages of how we develop a work plan and how we do asset management, is the next step. And this is kind of critical because I think the requirements of 588.17, part 4 in the asset management section of that regulation say that we have to select the lowest cost activities and develop a 10-year work plan, and then gauge how the performance of the road system is going to work out over that time. So doing that manually or trying to develop your own routine in Excel or something like that might be prohibitively difficult. That's why I think you need the software. So again, repeating the message, the best way to optimize funding is to keep the good roads good, do the right treatment at the right time. The top bullet there, the absolute minimum outcome of the model should be to maintain the overall average condition of the asset group. I have been saying in asset management presentations since about 1998, and preferably we'd like to improve it. That's the essence of what OREG 588.17 says as well. It says we got to maintain the condition of the assets over time. So the performance models used to optimize available funding and prioritize projects that offer the best return on investment, select the appropriate treatment in a given condition, and keep those good roads good. So when we do our model, though, we have to, you know, we make some assumptions. So part of the assumptions are we have quality materials, design, construction, and maintenance. And hopefully by having those quality parameters, the system will perform as we anticipated. And we also have to know how the agency pavements or road structures are going to perform, and then understanding those basic materials is quite important as well. I've been using this graph since I started doing asset management presentations. It's from 1983. I like to highlight that because asset management, the basic concept of asset management isn't really new, but it's a tough one to implement in a lot of agencies. So what it's really saying is that at that top end of the curve, we have our less cost activities. If we miss the opportunity to do one of those lesser cost maintenance or rehabilitation activities, the cost escalates. So deferring maintenance type activities or minor rehabilitations will cost us more in the long run. So that's the curve from the previous graph. At the top end of the curve, I want to do crack sealing, gravel road resurfacing, surface treatment, slurry, micro, other preservations. When I get down so far, if it's a road that's got a hard top on it, I'll want to do resurfacing, 1 or 2 lifts, major rehab, or reconstruct. As I slide down that curve, I have a decreasing return on investment with an increasing cost. Some municipalities would like to categorize, for whatever reason, above a certain dollar value or activity type is operational, and below that line that we've shown there is capital. We should think of the entire expenditure on the asset as maybe a reinvestment amount, because as we've shown here, and we will show, we have a better return on investment by doing work that's at the top end of the curve. If I slide under that graph from 1983, that's how it all fits together. So that's what the essence of the model is. The model will select those treatments that are the right treatment at the right condition and optimize that funding to extend or improve the condition of the asset. when we take that type of concept or the model and use your current funding levels and look at the performance over time, we can see that the current funding is insufficient to sustain the gravel road system. And we've got two models at your current funding level here. We've got a dark kind of goldy colored one and a dark goldy dotted line. So the dotted line is your current funding level with committed projects. The committed projects, for the most part, are the conversion of the semi-urban roads to hardtop roads. So you can see that that impact is greater in terms of the condition of the system over time than just following the recommendations of the model. But overall, the funding would need to be increased. We did show a graph earlier that had the same blue line in the background, and my sustainability calculation was $1.48 or $6 million a year. Whereas if I run a model and say, just keep the condition the same, the budget fluctuates quite a bit, but we're at 1.36 million. So you can see both those numbers are in that, let's say, $1.4 million range to sustain the condition of the assets over time. So they're in relative agreement. I also have run quite a few models over time. I started at one point in my career, my system was 1,440 kilometers and I had nearly 500 kilometers of gravel. And I saw how expensive the gravel road system was. So I started on a strategy to convert gravel roads to hardtop. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean that you just take any gravel road and put a hard surface on it. It has to meet a certain criteria. And we've included the further detail on that in Appendix D of the report. But basically, we're looking at, we need dimensional minimum requirements, and we need drainage, and we have to look at the traffic count, and we have to look at structure. So if you've got the drainage and the dimensions and the structure, then there's an opportunity to hardtop it. Because as the bigger graph here on this slide shows, if I just took the same road and I reconstructed it and left it as a gravel surface, the life cycle cost would be about $1 million over that 50 years. Whereas if I took that gravel road and converted it, reconstructed it, put a hard surface on it, the life cycle costs are $660,000, or about 2/3. So that's what has to be considered, and that definitely falls into the realm of asset management. So that's for further consideration when you're combining your other road assets together, because I think that is your plan, is to take the gravel roads and the hardtop roads and come up with a comprehensive plan based on the condition data for both sets. And this might be a strategy that you use to go forward. So as I've alluded to before, historically agencies have talked about fixed programming dollar values or percentages of the budget in terms of capital and operating. As we move more towards pure asset management, I think we have to ignore that, and the treatment selection will be by condition and not be limited to an arbitrary value. So the gross funding level should be sufficient to sustain or improve the asset group. And I like to refer to that as a reinvestment amount. So the arbitrary limitations through categorization, though, I think could limit the functionality or the performance of any asset group over time. This isn't for your system, but it illustrates my point. Is this budget is a little bit over $2 million a year, and the lines on the graph illustrate the dollar value of each type of improvement over a 50-year period. So you can see none of them are flatlined, and it's totally condition-based. So it's making decisions about what treatment to do at the right time to optimize that $2 million a year budget. And you can see there's quite wide fluctuations. So that's really what we're trying to get at with asset management and maybe a paradigm shift. We've made a number of recommendations in the report to deal with asset management. Funding recommendations in terms of long-term sustainability, funding levels to be adjusted to accommodate growth. I think that's quite important as you experience growth. In one of my lives, I worked for Ajax, and in 5 years, it grew about 30,000 people. So this becomes really important because you have some instant costs on the operational side to deal with growth, and then you have the longer term costs in terms of higher cost maintenance like resurfacing and then ultimately replacement. And you should adjust it annually to accommodate inflation. Bullet 5 is basically restating Regulation 588-17, ensure that preservation and resurfacing programs are optimized, and we should cross-integrate assets. And what that really means is we have a number of recommendations that we've made in the urban areas where there's a gravel surface, and certainly you don't want to reconstruct the road without considering the sewer and the water main at the same time. So the work plan should be followed to optimize investments and performance of the road system. And I would recommend inspecting the roads at a no greater than 4-year interval, preferably less than that, particularly as plans are implemented. And one of the reasons I recommend that is now if you've got a base condition and you start to spend money and you start to do rehabilitations and you continue to measure the condition, you can measure the condition over time and see if you're in essence winning or losing. So if the budget changes and the system condition is still going down, maybe it's program selection that is the issue. So those are the kind of things that will come out of a regular review of the condition. Gravel road conversion to hardtop should be integrated in the asset management plan. Master drainage plan should be developed for the gravel surface section in the semi-urban areas. I'm not quite sure if that has been done because there were some of the ditching in some of the semi-urban areas wasn't maybe too standard. So it might be an opportunity to look at those in terms of the master drainage plan. You should continue to update your traffic counts. That's a good exercise, and I know you're doing it on a regular basis. So the county information should be aggregated into one location though, to make it easy to decipher and include the percentage of truck traffic, the count year, and the count type, whether it's an estimated or an actual count. I would suggest the Highway Traffic Act has been modified a little bit, but some municipalities have created a bylaw where half loads can be implemented when the conditions permit, not by date. Because as you've seen probably through climate change, sometimes that we have what amounts to a spring breakup period occurring in the last week of February. And then we've got a week of maybe full loads on roads that would be better served with half loads at that time. We've listed a number of substandard, potentially substandard alignment instances. So a roadside safety audit should be maybe undertaken to review those and what should be done. Advisory tabs on roads with substandard width. Status of the boundary road agreements should be reviewed. I recommend that to most agencies. So, and then the level of service recommendations are as stated previously. The section numbering should be reviewed. Why I say that is because they're not sequential and sometimes they jump around. So that makes it a little bit harder if you're querying information to pull it out in a report that goes A, B, C, D, E, and they're one to the next. So those are the kind of things that you might want to look at. Develop a corporate asset management system through the organization with the development of a standard operating procedure. All too often people think that a asset management system is just the software. It's not. The software is part of the system. And so it's important that we understand that part of the system, we have rules of engagement. We understand what type of data and how that data is expressed goes into different data fields. And improving the understanding of the evaluation systems being used for the various assets. Again, that's not specific to Senator Wellington. I recommend that basically for everybody. I think understanding whatever system is being used is pivotal to making decisions going forward. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And once again, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, David, for that detailed report and those recommendations. I'm sure that our staff were pleased to get those recommendations from you. Anything that you wanted to add before I turn it over to questions from Council, Colin?
Yeah, I think just to add, so we're working through the recommendations. There is a detailed work plan that has a number of projects that we're trying to bring into the capital forecast. It is a challenge, like we are constrained in terms of the funding, so we just can't bring more projects in without shifting other important projects out. So the 2022 capital budget does have a starting point in terms of additional maintenance gravel, the spot drainage improvements that David's recommending as well, and a start at those gravel road conversions are included in the 2022 budget. But beyond that, we're going to have to take a closer look at other projects, because there's quite a list, and of course there's a gap between the recommended, the sustainable funding value, and basically what we're currently budgeting for, which is kind of in the 800,000 to about $1 million range at this stage. So
great, thanks for that, Colin. Questions from Council. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, David, for an excellent presentation. David, I have an accounting background, and I always think about annual amortization and trying to tie it to annual maintenance and upkeep. And Dave, you mentioned paradigm shift. I was intrigued by that, and I wondered if you could sort of elaborate on that a bit. And what I'm really thinking there, David, is how do we ensure that for our 200 kilometers of gravel roads, for example, we want to make sure the annual depreciation or amortization of that road network is matched with an annual transfer to a reserve and or actual maintenance expenses, so that we're keeping up and keeping the road network up to snuff over time. We haven't done that in the past. Am I seeing that clearly, David? Maybe you can elaborate.
Oh, yeah, I thank you very much through you, Mr. Mayor. There's a lot of good points there, and that is the essence of what I'm saying, is there's that amortization cost. But one of the things, and there's two regulations to be met here too, like, so the finance department has to meet the requirements of PSAB 3150, which is basically historic looking. So the historic amortization is not the same as the current. If I bought that house 30 years ago, it was quite a different cost than if I bought it today. So when we're dealing with asset management, we're looking at that current cost. So that's where that amortization is different from maybe the historic amortization cost. So one of the measures to look at from our municipality is, where is your funding? And this is a finance department thing that they might want to review, is, are you at least spending at your historic amortization cost? Because if you're not spending at the historic cost, you are not sustaining the asset. Going forward, and I think this is where you were headed, is like, here's the current replacement cost, and it was around $2 million. Do you have to spend $2 million every year? Is no. My suggestion to municipalities is to take that $2 million and I think you said the word reserve, and I think that's a great idea. Start to treat this like water and wastewater, and the requirements for that financial plan is that you create a reserve that's dedicated to that asset. So you don't spend all the money that comes into water and wastewater every year. But when you have to do something, the money is in the reserve. And I think if you apply that concept to your bridges and to your roads, and you get the funding level at the right level and ramp that up, of course, over time, then when you do need to do the work, the funding is there. So it doesn't become a big hit on an annual budget. And particularly bridges, as an example, would be a major hit. So you can't, bridges cost a lot of money. So if you aren't putting money in a reserve every year that represents the amortization cost, the year that a bridge comes up for renewal or replacement or whatever is a significant impact on the budget. Similarly, if you don't have money in the reserve and you have major road failure or something that's quite dramatic, then taking money from another that was dedicated for another purpose to repair that will result in some other asset failing. So I think, if I understood what you'd said correctly, I think we're talking about the same thing. I've maybe phrased it a bit differently, but certainly similar concepts. I think you'd understood what I was saying there.
Yes, I do, David. I guess ultimately my question is, we've got miles and miles of gravel roads, and a lot of people are concerned about the condition of them. And I don't think we've kept up over the years since amalgamation and maintaining them. And I wonder how we can get back on track, so that annual depreciation is approximately equal to annual reserve transfer and annual spending.
Well, it's unfortunately it requires more money.
Well, that's right.
And so that is really the essence of moving forward. There are municipalities that have the municipality I referenced over the course of the last 20 years. I think in 2025 there will be no gravel roads left. So they undertook a program that resembled that flow chart and then adjusted the funding. So there were increases to taxes to do it, but it became, in essence, part of the asset management plan for the conversion of those assets to a hard surface, and then having reduced life cycle costs because of that conversion.
Thanks, David. Sounded for a minute there like you were doing an infomercial for our dedicated bridge rebuilding program there. So appreciate that. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks, Mayor. I have no direct questions. I just I find it very interesting, the whole paving or hard topping versus gravel and the savings in the long term. And so it's good that we've done this. There's a lot to read here and consider. And as was stated, the unfortunate part is it means more money in the layout in the first area to get the roads back into shape and the assets. But thanks for the report. It's really good.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Councillor McElwain.
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, I'd like to thank you for an excellent report. It pointed out a lot of things that aren't necessarily brought to our attention on a regular basis. So, and the life cycle of gravel versus hardtop is one of them. I just had a question, I guess, for I'm not sure if it's Colin, but the suggestion here, well, how long do we amortize our roads now? Over what period of time do we amortize our roads, and therefore the capital depreciation value?
I can let Colin go with that. I know I use 50 years in the report, and one of the reasons I did that is when I started consulting, a lot of the accounting people said, we don't want to have anything with over 50 years. And that's how I ended up with that.
Okay, that's why I saw yours, and I just wonder what ours actually is currently.
Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. And I'm not 100% sure. I think it is 50 years, but I don't know if Dan can weigh in and verify that.
Yes, through you, Mayor Linton, we do use 50 years for our current asset management planning. So it's similar to what David is using.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to say thank you very much for this report. It's been a long time waiting for this. It has virtually verified what my constituents have been yelling at me for a long time, that we are underfunding our gravel roads, especially my rural constituents. I have a few questions. One was, will we be moving forward with a reserve for this, and so that we can allocate fund the a proper level of funding, but not necessarily use it. And at the same time as this reserve, will we be receiving reports that measure each road and classify them? Because this is what, you know, it will be clarifying to citizens to know this. I was very, very pleased that you had the suburban going to paving. That was a very, very positive reinforcement of what my constituents would like. The one thing I do have for David, there were two questions there already, but for David, I would just have a question. Is there a trigger point on a rural road in terms of traffic counts that would trigger it to be a prioritizing to be paved? Because we have commuters coming through our municipality to, let's say, to larger municipalities, and they just race through our rural roads and they use them all. Is there some sort of traffic count that stipulates that maybe this is a priority road that we should pave?
Through you again, Mr. Mayor. Yes, in the inventory manual, and that inventory manual was written quite a while ago, but in terms of modern asset management, kudos to the Ministry of Transportation for being so forward thinking. So in the manual, it says a gravel road with 400 or more vehicles a day should be a hardtop. So even if it was a perfect gravel road, they're recommending hardtop at 400 or higher. However, there are other studies from the states, Federal Highways Administration in South Dakota come to mind, Minnesota. They have reports that suggest that it's more cost effective to have a hardtop road for anything over 100 vehicles a day. So there's been quite a lot of studies out there. So 400 it's a higher number, but to answer your question, yes, there are some measures out there for that.
Councillor Kittrus, following.
I was just wondering if Dan and Colin could answer the previous inquiries.
Dan?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. Staff are working on an asset management plan update right now. That plan, when it comes forward to council, will recommend annual investment levels, not only in rural roads, but all asset categories of the township, including use of reserves and so forth. So that is coming forward as part of our asset management plan update.
Thanks, Dan. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, my question was about asset management. Dan just asked it, but Colin, we have another report that we're anticipating coming from this to this council about road speed limits and traffic conditions on those roads. So either you or David, could you respond? I know we're talking a lot about converting gravel roads to hardtop. And what are the implications of when we do that? How the traffic speed increases and the safety of those roads becomes a question, because people are flying down those roads. They're already flying down gravel roads. If they've got hardtop, I think it's going to exacerbate the situation.
Yeah, Colin, you want to answer that?
Yeah. Thanks, Mayor Linton, and through you to Councillor Dunsmore. So we are working on a policy to review speed limits. We are, as we reported to council last month, looking at a data-driven approach to establishing a technically justified speed limit in certain areas. We're getting requests quite frequently to lower speed limits, thinking that it'll have. I think the intent is to have a traffic calming effect, and from what we understand, it doesn't necessarily have that that desired effect in some cases, but where we have, maybe, higher exposure to pedestrians or, kind of curves in the roads where it does get warranted, or more driveways or intersections, there may be a justification to lower speed limits in certain areas. So we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing if we're starting to sway from the Highway Traffic Act default speed limits, especially in the rural. They fall under 80 kilometers an hour in the rural areas unless otherwise posted, and 50 kilometers an hour in urban areas unless otherwise posted. As for converting those roads to gravel, and will that exacerbate the speeding issue? That's hard to tell. We do quite often, as you're aware, get complaints. We just moved out a road, got out all the potholes in the cold patch, and then the next calls we get the next week are speeding concerns. And so it seems to be a trend, but as you know, it seems drivers are racing on the gravel roads at pretty high speeds. But essentially, what we know is drivers will travel at the speeds they feel comfortable with, right? So if it's a straightaway and it feels like a highway, nice and wide, drivers tend to drive at speeds they feel safe. That's why we're trying to take a different approach, especially in our urban areas, where we're narrowing the lanes. In our urban areas, we've gone with a 3-meter travel lane, like on Water Street, 3.25, some of the bump outs, curb extensions that we've done in certain areas to really calm that traffic down and create what we're trying to call friction points, where drivers just don't have it doesn't feel like it's a highway. It feels like more of a local road, and that automatically slows them down. But certainly hard to induce traffic calming in the rural areas. So it's a challenge. It certainly is a challenge, without kind of that focused enforcement.
Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I'd just like to say thank you to staff for retaining David to advise us on our road systems. I found the report very interesting, and well, I always thought that hard surface life cycle costs were more than gravel. It's interesting to see it's the other way around. One question I have is related to slide 26, talking about the semi-urban upgrades. So am I to understand that it would cost us approximately 150,000 plus to add hardtop to all of the Salem roads?
Who's best to answer that one? Yeah, Colin?
We're just, I think maybe Dave, if you can speak to it, you're just on mute there, but
Yeah.
while you're looking it up, no problem. Yeah, so when we're talking semi-urban sections, Salem is just one example. So these are all throughout the township, really. We have examples in Bellwood, like Smith Street, in Ennettville. There's some gravel roads that, the look and feel of the area is like a subdivision, although the lots are bigger, but they're on a gravel road, right? So those are what we're referring to as semi-urban. Lamont Street in Councillor Kittrus's ward, with Anderson Street as well. These are the semi-urban sections where, again, there's more homes in the area, and those would be the kind of types of examples we'd be looking at a hard top. So whether it be kind of double surface treatment, where we did some trials, as council know, we tested it out on the crescents in Ward 3 at Chalmers and Cummings and Barnett Crescent in Fergus there, and got some great lessons learned. But it seems to be an appropriate treatment that we could apply to these semi-urban sections. Just with the one proviso, there's some areas that we can't get proper ditching in, as David mentioned in his presentation, where the homes are very close to the road, so we can't get that meter of depth between the crown of the road and the bottom of the ditch. So those ones, David's recommending that we look at, a localized storm sewer system before we go in and do any sort of hard surfacing. So I don't know, Dave, if you've had a chance to look at slide 26 there, I may have some insights into to the cost estimates there for gravel conversions.
Yes, and I did manage to turn on my my sound this time too. So sorry about
No
that.
worries.
Yeah, you're probably more in the 9 million range for all
Yeah,
of
9 million.
those conversions, because you've got that, there's the DST upgrades, and there's the surface treatment, semi-urban DST upgrade, semi-urban hot mix asphalt upgrade. The RSS treatment would relate to the roads in some of the roads in Salem too, and the RNS reconstruction nominal sewer. Again, they might be some of the lower volume roads that are in the urban areas outside of Salem, but they might have an adjacent road. So where I look with a shorter length of a gravel section that might adjoin another road, maybe you just reconstruct it, and then the drainage along the curb and gutter then is directed to the adjacent road and the storm sewer system there. So that's where I would use that reconstruction with a nominal storm sewer, that type of thing. So when I add up those, the RNS, RSS, and start looking at the DST upgrades, which might include some rural road sections, those changes are in that $10 million range.
So, yeah, what I was looking at was the SU DST UGs, semi-urban DST upgrades.
Right, and that's not all of the semi-urban roads, because you've got some of them we upgraded with asphalt, as we've shown there. So there's the SU HCB, so that's hot mix asphalt upgrade, and then scroll up the list a little bit, and you've got RSS reconstruction with storm sewers. So that would be the sections on the easterly side of Salem, because I didn't, as Colin was alluding to there too, I don't think there's room to put in any kind of really ditching system. And then the RNSs, they're similar. Sorry, some of the commas are missing from the numbers there, but yeah, so those are the kind of things we're looking at. So it's more than just the DST semi-urban upgrades. It's
no, thank you for that clarification.
Three or four of those.
I think what Councillor McCray is looking at is an answer to provide to Salem residents when they ask him about their roads. So maybe he can work with Colin, now that we have this, to be able to provide them with an answer for Salem after this meeting. So I think that's potentially what Councillor McCray needs to get as part of his communication back to his residents. Just a couple comments from myself. I think I want to thank Dan for working with Colin and all the senior managers on asset management across the township. The township's been recognized as one of the leaders when it comes to small towns and the asset management that we've done. Before COVID, we've been invited to speak at 4 AMO conferences on our asset management successes in the past, especially the AMO wants us to highlight what we've done with the dedicated bridge rebuilding program. So I know David was talking about setting aside a dedicated reserve to look at certain things, and we've done that specifically with our bridges across Center Wellington. So that is something that we're recognized for, and it's good that we're continuing to do the work that we've been doing over the past few years on that. And it's good to get your report recommending a similar kind of approach that we've taken over the last few years for sure. I'm encouraged to see some of the graphs when it comes to our increased investment in our gravel infrastructure. Looking at the 2 attachments that you've provided, Colin, in your report, especially attachment 2, which demonstrates that between 2011 and about 2014-15, we were around $200,000 in maintenance gravel budget. But this council here, from 2019 to 2021, has been investing between over $800,000 per year in our gravel rebuilding efforts. So thanks to the members of council who supported the budgets over the last 3 years, because that's where the rubber hits the road, no pun intended, because when it comes to it, our asset management plans are all well and good, and we do some really great work here when it comes to asset management. But if we're not passing our budgets to put that money where our asset management plan says it should go, it really is for naught. So appreciate that we're continuing down on that process of making sure that we're rebuilding our infrastructure here. So thanks very much for your presentation, David, and Colin for bringing David in and to follow up on this request from council to really take a look at our gravel roads here. I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receive as information a report on the state of Township's gravel road network and recommended management strategy as outlined in report number IS 2021-16. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Kittredge. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thanks again, David. Moving on to information items, we have 5 different information items, minutes from several of our advisory committees, as well as our tracking list. I'll just throw those open to council. Any comments, questions from council on any of those information items? Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. 8.4, the Healthy Growth Advisory. Action item 5.1. In some of the reports that we've had at council, I've never heard about this, and I just would like to know from the people involved in healthy growth, was there a document that came out of that action item? So that's, I guess that's Mr. Van Leeuwen, Ian McCray, and yourself.
Yeah, I don't think there was a document that came out. It was really, we were getting, pardon? Yeah, sorry, I was just talking to our CEO here. It was just a conversation that we had. We invited several members of our development community to give us their sense on what some of the barriers were to building the supply of rental housing across Center Wellington. And we wanted to have the Healthy Growth Advisory Committee members have access to these developers to hear firsthand what some of their challenges were in increasing the supply of rental units. So it was really a conversation. There was no reporting. If there was a report that came out of any of these committees, council would see it as an addendum to these minutes. Any other comments from members of council? Okay, nothing to do with those information items. And can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Kittredge, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Have a good rest of the day.